He denied the black baby at birth, but nearly collapsed when he saw her again, this time in a judge's robe, and her first words in court to him were, "Mr. Carson, are you prepared to proceed?" You ever find yourself thinking you've buried the past, only to have it walk right back into your life, wearing a robe and holding your fate in its hands? Yeah, that happened. Harrison Carson's leather shoes hit the marble floor of the Richmond County Courthouse, and every click just screamed confidence, maybe even arrogance. At 58, he was senior partner at Carson & Associates, the kind of guy who made enemies and inspired fear just by stepping into a room. Today was supposed to be the capstone of his career, the opening day of a class-action suit against Westridge Pharmaceuticals. If he won, his firm stood to rake in millions, and he'd go out on top. Nothing could shake Heimer, so he thought. "Everything ready, Sharon?" he asked, straightening his custom-tailored suit. His young associate, always a step behind, replied, "Yes, Mr. Carson. All files are prepped. Witnesses are confirmed. There's just one thing. Last-minute judge reassignment." He froze. "Who's on the bench?" "Judge Ruth Thompson," she said, not seeing how the name hit him like a body blow. Harrison brushed it off in front of Sharon, but inside, his mind was racing. Ruth Thompson, the name he'd worked so hard to forget. 29 years earlier, when he was a rising star with Old Richmond money, he'd gotten involved with Magda Thompson, a brilliant black law student interning at his father's firm. When she told him she was pregnant, he made the cold calculation that his future mattered more than her, more than the baby. He denied everything, leaned on his family's power to discredit her, and walked away preserving his name, his career, and never seeing the child. Now, as he entered courtroom 3A, he scanned for the judge's bench empty. Funny, the man who built his legacy on never being surprised was about to get blindsided. When the bailiff called the court to order and Judge Thompson entered, Harrison felt like the room tilted. At 29, she was impossibly young for the bench, but carried herself with quiet power. She had his mother's cheekbones and his own stubborn jaw, but Magda's warm brown skin and her sharp, questioning eyes. "Good morning." Judge Thompson's voice rang out, steady and cool. "Please be seated. We're here on Westridge Pharmaceuticals versus Collins et al." She barely glanced at Harrisano hint of recognition, no flicker that she knew anything about who he was. Of course, she wouldn't. He'd made sure he was never part of her life. But for Harrison, the ground felt suddenly unstable. For the first time in decades, the man who controlled every situation felt like he was standing on quicksand. "Mr. Carson, are you prepared to proceed with your motions?" she asked, her tone giving nothing away. Harrison nodded, voice tight, "Yes, Your Honor." What Judge Thompson didn't know was that Harrison had quietly looked into her background months ago, when her name first popped up on the list of possible judicial appointments. He learned about Magda raising Ruth alone, about the Ivy League degrees, about her meteoric rise, how she'd become the golden girl of the judiciary, all without his help. But he'd also learned she'd recently ruled against a corporate giant, only to see her decision overturned amid rumors of judicial tampering, leaving her determined to prove herself. And now, she was presiding over the biggest case of his career. Everything his money, his reputation, maybe even a chance at redemption was on the line. He opened with a motion to dismiss, cool as ever, but Judge Thompson cut right through his argument. "Are you suggesting ongoing harm can be dismissed as time-barred? That these families' suffering doesn't count?" There was a challenge in her tone, a glimmer that made Harrison uneasy. Did she know? Or was it just her sense of justice? Before he could reply, she moved on. "Technicalities don't trump justice in my courtroom, Mr. Carson." The words echoed in his mind, and he wondered if she was sending a message only he could hear. The rest of the day blurred by. He barely heard the arguments, distracted by the memory of Magda and the child he'd denied. But there was a new twist. Judge Thompson had received a mysterious envelope full of old photos, letters, and DNA results, all pointing straight to him. Someone out there was playing a dangerous game, and he was the pawn. That afternoon, after adjournment, Judge Thompson called him to her chambers. The room was empty, but for her and her clerk, who quietly left. "Mr. Carson, I've received information suggesting a personal connection that might constitute a conflict of interest. Harrison kept his face neutral. I'm not aware of any such connection. She slid a manila envelope across the desk. This contains DNA results linking a sample from my mother's effects to an anonymous sample yours. His mouth went dry. How did you a water glass from the Bar Association event? She said quietly. There's a 99.8% probability. You're my biological father. The words landed like a hammer. I should recuse myself, she said, but that would raise questions I'm not ready to answer. Not yet. What do you want? Harrison asked, barely recognizing his own voice. She let her anger show for a split second. You think this is blackmail? I need to understand. My mother told me my father died before I was born. 3 weeks ago, I found letters that said otherwise. I want to know why you denied us. Before he could answer, her clerk burst in. There's been a motion for recusal. They're claiming you're biased because your husband died due to Westridge's product. That's a lie, Ruth replied. I've never been married. The documents, marriage and death certificates, medical records were all forged. Harrison realized someone was desperate to get Ruth off the case, or maybe to ensure she stayed, by making the recusal attempt look like sabotage. His mind was spinning. Who was behind this? Was someone using their connection to manipulate the case? Just then, Harrison received a text. We know about your daughter. Choose wisely in court today, or everyone else will know too. Someone was blackmailing him using Ruth as leverage. For a moment, he and Judge Thompson were no longer adversaries, but reluctant allies. He showed her the message, and together they tried to figure out who was pulling the strings. Minutes later, Sharon, his associate, showed him a legal blog breaking the story. Rumors of a personal connection between the judge and the defense. His phone buzzed again. That was just a warning. Do as we say, or the full truth comes out. Check your email. In his inbox was a doctored expert report that would sabotage his client if he submitted it with a threat. Present it, or the world learns you abandoned your black girlfriend and daughter. Harrison was trapped. Present the falsified report and destroy his integrity, or face public humiliation for abandoning Ruth. Back in court, as Judge Thompson addressed the fraudulent recusal motion, Harrison made his decision. Your Honor, I need to bring a matter to the court's attention. Someone attempted to blackmail me into presenting falsified evidence. The room erupted. Judge Thompson called a recess, and as they moved to her chambers, news broke online. DNA evidence proved Judge Thompson is the estranged daughter of defense counsel. The article was by Rodney Carson Harrison's own brother, who had always resented him. Rodney had sold out his own blood, and worse, had been paid off by Peter West, the CEO of Westridge. Fred, Harrison's investigator, traced the threatening messages back to Westridge's corporate network. Rodney had helped West try to fix the case blackmail, fraud, forgery, the works. Judge Thompson, her integrity unshaken, announced she'd review the explosive emails the plaintiffs were fighting to unseal mails that proved Westridge knowingly sold a drug that killed black patients. When the FBI and the U.S. attorney showed up, Harrison finally withdrew as counsel and handed over the evidence of blackmail. In open court, Westridge tried one last gambit accusing Ruth's late mother of insurance fraud. But Ruth stood strong, and as West was arrested, Harrison realized just how far his own client and his own brother had gone to hide the truth. Judge Thompson, after revealing that she'd grown up battling illness while Magda nearly went bankrupt to save her, decided to recuse herself. Harrison was left facing a legacy of abandonment he could never undo. That night, he reviewed files proving Magda had been falsely accused by a corrupt insurance company. He learned that Ruth had followed in her mother's footsteps, becoming a legal crusader for those who had no voice. The next morning, Ruth summoned Harrison to her chambers. Now, just a woman confronting the man who'd walked away from her life. She gave him a copy of her official statement, unflinching, honest, holding herself and Harrison accountable, no matter what the media said. When he tried to apologize, she asked for the truth. Why had he abandoned them? Harrison admitted his cowardice and selfishness, and Ruth, with remarkable dignity, told him she felt sadness, not hate, for what might have been. He asked for the chance to know her, not to replace what was lost, but to build something new. Ruth wasn't ready to forgive, but she was willing to try for herself and for Magda. It wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was a beginning. When they left together, the press descended, cameras flashing. Harrison stepped forward. 29 years ago, I made the worst mistake of my life. Today, I'm taking the first step toward making it right. He spoke not for sympathy, but for truth. As Ruth stood behind him, the journey of healing began not for his reputation, but for the possibility of becoming the man his daughter could one day respect. You know what I mean? Some stories aren't just about justice or scandal theory, about facing the ugliest parts of yourself and choosing to be better, even if it's almost too late. If you've got thoughts about right and wrong, justice, or family, share your take below. Where do you stand? Can people really change? Or are some mistakes unforgivable? Let's hear it.